This happened in Antioch, California. It was around 2 a.m. I was at a friend's house, safe in warm sheltered suburbia. We were having a lot to drink, chit-chatting and enjoying ourselves. Of course, when you're having fun, time hits the fast forward button and those few minutes turn into an hour. I had too much to drink. My friend has a bit an abrupt bedtime, so I had to dodge out early, still intoxicated. I felt too shameful thinking I'd be asking too much to stay in his house to sleep off the drunkenness. I suppose he was either too rude or too drunk to consider it himself. Whatever. Sometimes a little inconvenience makes you appreciate everything else, right? I needed about an hour or so to sober up and drive back. As fast as time passed during my stay, it decided to drastically slow down as soon as I stepped out of his house. It was a cul-de-sac area, a concrete jungle with the stem of the street light breaking into a fork. Alongside the road, my car was parked. The only street light that worked was in the middle of the cul-de-sac circle, about 80 yards away. Stumbled towards my car, produced my keys, felt the metal lineup, opened my door, and shifted to the back seat. Because this was a dark, strange, and unfamiliar neighborhood, I took the leftover newspapers and a sweater in my back seat to cover myself up. I was a little scared. I wanted to camouflage myself and not be just some guy awkwardly sitting in his car waiting for time to pass in order to drive home. I couldn't fall asleep. The uncomfortable feeling of a cheap backseat bed enshrouded in darkness didn't make the chance of slumber easier. It felt too ominous. And of course, my mind began to wander. I thought of worst-case scenarios. Like how the police would shine their lights on me through the window or a drunk driver hitting my car, and... wait. In the distance, about 100 yards away, I could hear footsteps approaching. The gravel scuffed with each step forward, growing in proximity but periodically taking stops. I wondered why until it made sense in my mind. Whoever it was probably looking through cars carefully, with the intent to steal one. I couldn't recall how many cars were on the block, but I counted 3 full stops until he was at my window breathing. I froze. There was no more than 1 foot between us now. The car encapsulated me as I lay hidden beneath backseat clutter, forming myself into an object, trying my hardest to be unnoticeable, unmoving, and simply not there. "I see you," said a 40-plus-year-old man in a perverse baby talk. Imagine when you were playing hide and seek and one of your friends tricks you into coming out. He said it in that tone of voice, as if baiting me, like he was questioning whether the clutter in the backseat was just clutter or a person. I didn't want to move or check the window. I remained cluttered. Give me an Academy Award. My body reacted by minimizing my breathing so much that I felt paralyzed. I dare not look. My eyes fixated on the back of the passenger seat. I didn't blink, I didn't move, and I didn't breathe really. My heart was pounding so hard it shook my body with each throb. He circled around the car. My ears didn't fail me. I heard the steps. I felt like I was part of the car. I could feel him touching the trunk as he carefully pressed down on it, as if to test the alarm or to test me. I was in the middle of fight or flight. I couldn't do either without elevating danger. I was frozen, hoping that he was bluffing. He circled the car again, and the door handle to my right jiggled. He was pulling it multiple times. "I see you." Same tone, but more agitated and stressed. More convinced that he was trying to make that clutter move, revealing it to be of his expectations that it was me. My muscles tensed like a cow before slaughter. Tap, 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 tap. That had to be metal against glass. Take a penny right now and tap your window. A crowbar, a knife, a rock, a gun. My eyes fixated on the seat in front of me, never averting my gaze like he was. I was covered enough to where I couldn't see beyond the seat in front of me. I know I couldn't see him, but I could feel his eyes resting on top of me. "My name is Pokerface. What's your name?" The voice changed in a lower, demented, and serious tone. My mind forced a visual. It wasn't anything human. I already accepted my death. I was ready to be shot in the head, ready to take a life-changing bullet and have multiple knife wounds. Just make this sleep bearable, not excruciating, as you drain me out of life. I wouldn't know how to react. My thoughts grew dimmer. I imagined my friend waking up the next morning after a calm night of safe and sound sleep, only to discover my mutilated, defiled, and bloodied body hanging outside my car door. It was then that I heard nothing but my own heart. What was this person doing now? Just staring at me in the middle of the night? Talking to me, or a messy pile in the back seat? Time froze. The footsteps were being swallowed in the distance. Thankfully, he left. I waited another hour until the sun showed hints of itself. I jumped in my front seat and bolted out of there, wide-eyed and sober enough. story on here reminded me of the time some friends and I stayed in what had to be the third most shitty hotel in Vegas, which for Vegas is really saying something. When I managed to inadvertently traumatize the entirety of my company as I recounted what I considered to be an amusing childhood story. The hotel itself was a bit of a nightmare, as everything was bolted down and none of the doors locked, but I digress. I decided that this would be a good place to put it, given the input of my buddies. The story itself is basically about my family's run-in with Satanists on a trip to upstate New York. Though the growing expressions of disbelief and horror on my companions' faces assured me that the story was not, as I had previously considered, funny per se. In any case, what follows is completely true, and everyone present swears by this narrative. When I was 5 years of age, we took a road trip, as was common in our family, up to upstate New York to see my grandmother on my father's side, as well as to tour around the countryside a bit. There we were in rural upstate, away from the region in which my grandmother actually lives, and we were planning on staying in a bed and breakfast my father had booked ahead of time. It had been an unexpectedly long drive due to weather complications, and when we found the B&B in question, we were all quite tired. We went up to the door to check in, and a woman missing her 2 front teeth on both jaws answered. She invited us in, but warned us that they didn't have any room for the night. They were booked solid. My father protested that he had made the arrangements in advance, but she said she knew another hotel that had a vacancy just up the way, and she would give them a call, and she assured them they would offer the same rates. But first, she insisted on showing my parents around, as her husband was an artist and she wanted to show them his studio and famous artwork. We were all invited in, but after seeing the first few pieces of naked women, missing their front teeth, bound or being tortured in various ways, my parents opted to leave the kids outside with Grandma. Apparently, most of the rooms were full to the ceiling with similarly foreboding images of dead or dying people, with the occasional sculpture of menacing animals. My parents were a bit creeped out, but just figured these people were eccentric and they had dodged a bullet by ending up somewhere else. We all waited out back while the woman called her friend, beside a pit containing what could have been nothing other than an altar, covered with pentagrams. My mother mentioned that it seemed strange that not only had they not met the husband, who was supposedly there somewhere, after touring the entire house, but also that there hadn't been a single sign of life or piece of luggage suggesting that anyone was actually staying in any of the guest bedrooms in this supposedly fully booked B&B. A side note that's probably not worth mentioning, but that I found strange, was when my mother brought it up while telling me the story later. As I was only 5 at the time, a lot of this story has been narrated to me after the fact by different people who were involved on some level. Was that we stopped by a park to stretch our legs at some point before proceeding to the next place. The storm was closing in on us, and my parents wanted to be sure we had zero energy upon arrival. While in this park, my mother claims that one of us found and brought to her a small necklace with a pendant on it. The pendant itself was a pentagram on one side, with a third Reich symbol on it. My mother took it away and put it in her purse. We arrived at the next bed and breakfast to be greeted by a different woman, also conspicuously missing her 2 front teeth, upper and lower. It was about this time that my grandmother mentioned that she had read a lot of articles recently about tourists being killed by some cult of Satanists or some such in this area. That's great. She tended to tell a lot of the tales. So I think my parents kind of rolled their eyes and dismissed it, but they made a point to mention it later. The storm was now upon us. We were all exhausted, and there was nowhere else to stay that we could find anywhere near there. My dad decided we would make do with whatever they had to offer. What they had to offer was a slightly renovated barn. During the bustle of moving our luggage in, the woman kept inviting my brother, 3 years old, and me into the house, saying she had some sweets and wouldn't we like to meet her kiddies. She made it clear, however, that my parents were not welcome into the house because it was too messy and she would be embarrassed. We were herded away into the barn and told not to talk to the lady. Once inside, my father, who was by this time a bit creeped out, went about checking the beds and securing the one-room barn unit. The windows had no coverings whatsoever and the doors had no locks. We placed pillows from the couches in the window frames, and my dad grabbed a dresser against one wall to block the door. When he went to move the dresser, he discovered it was on wheels, which were completely silent. He also noticed that the wall behind it moved a little when he shifted the dresser. When he scrutinized the wall, he found a seam. He pushed on the wall and it gave way, 2 invisible doors opening outwards into the night, and just outside was a dark-colored van that had been backed up to the opening. Livid, my dad went about rearranging all the furniture in the room, stacking the heaviest against the outward swinging doors and moving the mobile dresser with various loud objects behind it against the main door. When he had completed this and we were all starting to settle down, at about 11 p.m., the woman brought us freshly baked blueberry muffins. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't remember much of this trip, but this is one element I have a vivid recollection of. With the inclement weather and the rush to find a place to stay, complemented by the lack of restaurants, we hadn't had what one might consider a proper meal. When you're 5, dinner is very important. The muffins were fresh baked and smelled heavenly. I wanted one more than I wanted anything else in the world. However, presuming probably correctly that they were poisoned or something was seriously wrong about them, since this entire thing was beginning to feel like a horror movie in of itself, my mother absolutely forbade us from ever going near them. She put them on a high shelf and sent us to bed. I was upset. I went to bed hungry and irritable. Only 2 things happened that night that I can recall. My parents slept very lightly, if at all, as you might imagine. They claimed they kept hearing talking outside. My sister woke us all with blood-curdling scream around 1 a.m. for reasons unknown, as she was usually a very quiet baby. When my parents got up and milled for about an hour trying to get her back to bed, my mom noticed something on the wall as she was walking her around and called my father over. What I would later learn was that the picture hanging to one side of the door that, during the daylight, seemed to be logs in a recently extinguished fire pit in a tranquil forest scene was, by night, unmistakably burning corpses with a hooded, smoky figure looming over them. We got up the next morning, packed up early, and waited for the lady to get up so we could pay and leave. While my parents were packing the bags, the woman came back around and gave both my brother and me small wooden cats carved into the form of napkin holders, each with a different color, that she had written little notes on. As my father was paying after loading us into the car, my mom began kicking the gravel around the drive absent-mindedly. The woman came over to say goodbye and waved to us with her gapped grin, and my mother noticed that she was trying to discreetly recover the tiles that she was uncovering under the gravel. Before driving off, my mother got back out of the car and uncovered one of the tiles, and she claims it was the same pentagram with the Third Reich symbol within it that she had seen a similar version of in the park, prompting her to notice, as we drove away, that the necklace was no longer in her purse. The likelihood of it simply falling out of the purse pocket she had placed it in was, as she put it, quite unlikely. People listening to the story seemed appalled at the fact that I still have that little wooden cat that the nice lady gave me, sitting in my bedroom. I know this all sounds very strange, but I can only assure you that it matches well with my memory of the events, and all the adults who were there tell me the same story, and 2 of them are not known to extrapolate at all. Personally, I'm glad it's just a weird story we look back on with confusion, and that nothing stranger happened that night. This happened very recently and is still very fresh in my memory. My name is Simone. No, not Simon. I'm a girl, and I'm 20 years old. I live in the countryside in an idyllic village where half the houses are vacation homes. Not much happens here, but if you enjoy nature, it's great. I'm an outdoorsy kind of woman, my favorite element being water. I do kayaking, diving, swimming, and anything else water-related I can get my hands on. I was on my way home from the night shift. I got this job just for the summer at a halfway house. It's a home for 8 recovering addicts, and there have to be always 2 people working there at night too, just in case. It's usually very calm. We play cards, watch TV, cook, etc. Very easy money for me. So back on topic. I was driving home and, as I always do, I stopped at the little secluded lake for a swim. I can never resist a good swim and always have a bikini in the car. This lake isn't very large but is crystal clear and surrounded by a beautiful forest area. You would never know it was there if no one told you. The little road that leads down to the beach is narrow and well hidden. As a result, there's almost never anyone there apart from the occasional dog walker. I had only just started to swim out into the lake when I felt that my car key, which I keep tied onto a piece of string and tie around my ankle, didn't feel tight enough, and I was afraid it would slip off my ankle and be lost. So instead of swimming straight out into the lake, I quickly made my way around the little rocky part of a headland. Not sure if that word correctly describes it, but my English is limited. If the lake were slightly L-shaped, I would be in the angle and could see through to the beach and car. As I fasten the string better, I look up towards my car. I'm now in a hidden spot not far from the beach and the car, but hidden behind a corner so I can see the car from the side. I didn't see him at first, and I had to squint to make sure it wasn't an illusion, a trick of my imagination. But no, squatting behind my SUV was a man in a bright yellow hoodie that I recognized. I didn't see his face, of course, and it was too far away to actually see who it was anyway, but I recognized the hoodie. It was Creepy Freddy. He was only 17, but very unstable and hadn't returned from his visit to his parents the day before. We had called the police, of course, but since he usually turns up on his own after a few days of freedom and drugs, the police often advise us to wait and see. He had earned his name Creepy Freddy after assaulting a girl with a scythe for no other reason than that he felt she was too beautiful. She wasn't badly injured, but still, creepy indeed. He had a long history of drug-induced violent outbursts, and even if he was nice enough when sober, he was a nightmare when he wasn't. I thought about trying to get up, leave the car, and try to walk towards the main road. But what if he spotted me and ran after me? I had no idea if he was fit or not, and I was barefoot, and my orange bikini would be easy to spot. I decided against it. The risk of ending up face to face with a probably drugged, violent, and possibly armed Freddy was too big of a risk. I considered my options and realized there was only one: to swim across the lake and reach the little cluster of vacation cottages that occupied the opposite beach. As quietly as I could, I started to swim. The swim took me over 90 minutes, and I kept turning around to see if I was being followed. I reached the other beach, exhausted and cold. I walked up the sandy beach as a young mom and her kid spotted me. I explained the situation, and she phoned the police and fed me scones and coffee and the best waffles I ever had. Police arrived to find Freddy gone, and all 4 of my tires were slashed. I resigned from my job at the halfway house, and I hope we never meet again. Freddy is, as far as I know, still not found. So back in 2015, I had the choice of getting a dog and getting a smartphone. I'd never had a dog in my life or a decent phone, come to think of it, and I'd been saving up for a phone anyhow, so I naturally picked the dog. My dad knew a fellow who had a couple of border collies that had recently had a litter, so we drove out and the dude gave me the last pup. Enter Bailey. A couple of weeks after he got his shots, I started walking with him. My parents figured I was going to be hanging out at a local park with my new pup, so I could get him socialized, but no. I chose to take him around the perimeter of a nearby farm to keep the farm dog in him. I'd been sneaking out to this farm for years. The farmer was an old family friend. My uncles had grown up working for him, so I knew if I was ever caught, I could just drop their name. On either side of the farm, there was some thick woodlands, which no one had ever given me a reason to be wary of. They probably should have. So it's a sunny afternoon. It had been pouring down all week, and Bailey was itching for a good walk. I take him to the farm at our usual time, and we start making our way around to the woods on the east side of the farm. Everything is quiet, but Bailey keeps starting away from me to explore. He's a puppy. It's what they do, but of course I've been calling his name all the way around the field. We're about halfway past the woods. I could see the roof of the farmhouse over the next hill. Bailey's been pulling crap out of the bushes all the way along, and I just got him into trouble for rolling in a pile of fox crap. That's when I hear a man's voice calling my dog by his name. Like, this dude I didn't even know was calling my dog by name. I knew it wasn't the farmer because I'd met him at family events like barbecues and weddings, etc., so I knew what his voice sounded like. I go completely silent, but the guy keeps calling on my dog. Sounds like he's deep into the woods and maybe moving. He's calling my dog with an excited tone in his voice, which is what creeps me out the most. Bailey, meanwhile, is completely ignoring this guy and sniffing the now flat pile of poop. I'm like a tiny 18-year-old girl. The most combat experience I have is a month learning Taekwondo when I was 11, and I don't even have a mobile phone. If that guy works out where I am, I'm screwed, and if Bailey decides to go in after him, I'm double screwed because I am not letting a possible psycho get his hands on my puppy. I can either run to the farm, which isn't too far away, or run back through the fields towards home. I pick up my dog and sprint across the field. Behind me, I hear someone emerge from the woods, but I'm already over the fence and sprinting back home with my puppy tucked under my arm. I get home and tell my mom. She brushes it off as some weird drunk guy. A few weeks later, I'm at my uncle's house and the farmer walks in. I told my uncle what happened, so he brings it up. The farmer asked exactly which woods I'd been close to and said that some of his clothes had gone missing from his washing line. He put it down to strong winds, but now he's not sure. I take him and my uncle to the exact spot the next day, and all 3 of us go in and find a completely wrecked campsite. There are no clothes or anything, but the tent has collapsed in on itself. There's no fire, but there are some empty gas canisters like you'd use for a portable stove and empty packets of food scattered everywhere. We reported to the police, but nothing ever really comes of it, except that I got a phone not long after and keep it on me whenever I go out. My story takes place in my home country where people are more likely to believe in the paranormal. I was around 18 when this happened. I was at home. It was late at night, around 11 p.m. got into a fight with my boyfriend, as teens tend to do. And naturally, it got overdramatic. There was yelling on phones and tearful confessions. When I put the phone down, I got an idea in my head. Probably the stupidest thing I've ever done. I decided to walk to his house and confront him face to face. He and I only live 15 minutes apart if you walk. However, we're separated by roads that are very dimly lit. If you drive past, you'll never see anyone on the sidewalk. People just don't walk there at night because it's dark as heck. We basically live in a part of town consisting of gated communities, and I was going to walk from mine to his. So I put on a sweater, some shorts, and sneakers. My appearance plays a big part in this because I have a very stereotypically Asian doll look. Bangs, long straight dark hair, rather pale skin, and everything. And I'm short, only 5 feet tall. Until now, I could look 12 if I really wanted to. Basically, I'm the last person in the world who would look threatening, and that's not good for me. But that night I was angry. Deep down, I knew walking there was dangerous, but I wouldn't listen to the alarm bells in my brain. I set off walking at a brisk pace. It was dark. There was no one on the streets. I was completely alone and very mad. So mad that I suddenly got a nosebleed. Already, I've been tearing up from the drama, and that had to happen. I get nosebleeds when I'm stressed, so out of nowhere, blood gushed from my nose and splattered all over my clothes. It was like a running faucet, and I staved it off a bit with my hands, so my hands got bloody too. My face was tear-streaked and blood-stained. I looked like a mess to say the least. Nevertheless, I was too mad to stop or turn back to even care. I kept walking, even more mad that my clothes were ruined. In my head, I looked like an idiot, and then I saw them. I froze. I had just crossed the street. The sidewalk had a wall to the left because that was another gated community. To the right was the road. I saw figures moving. Men, around 4 or 5. It was so dark I couldn't see their faces, but there was a ladder leaning against the wall. One of them was on it. They'd been talking, and I could see the glint of tools hanging from their belts. Saw and a hammer. At first, I thought they were repairmen, since it's normal around here for public repairs to be done late at night so that it doesn't get in people's way in the morning. But still, like any girl, I went from angry to terrified. A gang of men in a secluded area never bodes well for any person. I was going to turn around and flee in the other direction, but it was too late. Before I could leave unnoticed, they'd seen me, because they all turned their heads towards me at the same time. For a very brief moment, we all just stared at each other. It went by fast, so fast that I didn't even have the chance to look scared. My expression was still blank. Just when I was about to flee, one of them yelled, and I was caught in my tracks. But it wasn't an angry yell. It was a high-pitched trembling "ah" that trailed off into nothing. The rest of the men started cursing, and they scrambled. I was shaking. I thought they were going to run from me. But they were actually scared shitless. I realized this when they all ran for their car, parked right beside the sidewalk, leaving their ladder behind. They were still cursing, telling each other to hurry up as the car did the fastest, most impressive U-turn I've ever seen in my life. And they drove off in the other direction. I realized that, looking like a bloody China doll, they must have thought I was a ghost. I almost started laughing then and there, but I was too freaked out by the experience. I hightailed it to my boyfriend's house. Only around a week later did I find out in the papers that there had been a string of robberies around the area. The robbers would bring a ladder, lean it against the wall, and use it to get to houses that were located on the very border of the subdivision. Police actually found out their plans because they found a ladder that had been left behind, aka what happened during my night. One recent robbery had led to a maid being killed by the thieves. Until now, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that nosebleed. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 14 and my sister was 18. My dad is an avid fisherman who loves fishing in the middle of nowhere simply because there aren't any other people around. For this particular fishing trip, we went to a state park in Georgia a couple of hours from where we lived. After about an hour, down a mixture of a dirt and gravel road, we arrived at a pretty large clearing where we parked. We got out and walked down to a hill, to a small waterfall with a pool of water at the bottom. The river before the waterfall was very shallow. The details of the area are kind of important. When we arrived, we had lunch by the river and started fishing. We were there for about an hour when I started to get bored and went back to the car that was parked nearby for some water. On my way back to my dad, I noticed a man standing just behind the tree line of the clearing, about 30 feet from our car. Thinking it was slightly weird, I hurried back to my dad and told him about it. By the time I told him, we all looked back and the guy was already standing above us on top of the hill. This man gave us a very weird vibe from the start. He was in his late 20s and stood at about 6 feet. He wasn't an overly broad person, but he was far taller than my dad. He was dressed in an army uniform, although it honestly looked like a Halloween costume. The most noticeable part about him was the machete he was holding. My dad, remaining calm, started to strike up a conversation with him and asked if he was fishing here too. The man just stared at us for about a minute before answering that he was waiting for his friends to come by in a boat so he could be picked up. He had no car with him, no trailer, and he was at the base of a waterfall. Really good story there. My dad at this point was very concerned, even though he kept very calm. While chatting to the guy about arbitrary things, he was slowly packing up all of our stuff and putting himself between the man and his children. The man didn't respond much, just standing there being very twitchy and restless. In about 20 minutes, my dad managed to move us slowly up the hill and back to our car. When we started making motions to leave, however, the man started getting aggressive. He suddenly started talking about his time in the military and how his high school sweetheart left him for another. His eyes got wild after mentioning his ex-girlfriend, and he turned his attention to my sister. He started yelling about how women were awful and would always be unworthy of a man's attention, all while leering at my sister and stabbing the ground repeatedly with his machete. At this point, my dad decided we needed to go and motioned for my sister and me to get in the car before he followed and locked the doors. We got out there in a hurry as the guy washed his sleeve before going back into the trees. This guy's become a bit of a joke in our family, as we dubbed him the Machete Man, but that experience will always stick with me. My dad admits that was the one time where he truly wished he had a gun because his only weapon at the time was a pair of scissors. When I was in 8th grade, my parents separated. Basically, my mom packed her and me up one night and we moved into my grandpa's and didn't look back. We ended up living there through my high school years. When he died, my parents officially got divorced. My mom remarried and we moved into the city with my stepfather. My grandpa lived on the first floor of the apartment and the owners, an elderly couple who were family to us through marriage, lived on the second floor. The property also had a small in-law cottage out in the back where my uncle lived. For some reason that I will never understand, there was no lock to get into the actual building if you entered through the back. The back door opened in a landing where there was a locked and dead-bolted door to our apartment, and then 2 sets of stairs. One led up to the also locked and dead-bolted door of the second floor apartment, and the other led down to the basement where there was also no lock. Our apartment could also be entered from the front of the building, but in order to access the second floor apartment or the basement, you had to go through this landing. The basement was actually pretty nice, and at one point they had started to convert it into its own apartment before they ultimately decided to make the in-law cottage instead. So, in the basement, there was a full kitchen complete with an oven, sink, and refrigerator. The washer and dryer, which were shared by all of us, were also in the basement as well as just some general storage stuff. The basement was entirely open except for a back room that was full of storage. It had one of those kinds of swinging saloon-type doors where you can see above and beneath them. The storage area was longer than it was deep, so you couldn't really see anything much behind the doors. Aside from shelves, you had to walk in them and turn to really see the room. One night when I was in high school, I think I was 15, after taking a shower, I saw that the laundry bin in the bathroom was pretty full, so I grabbed a ton of laundry and headed down towards the basement. It was pretty late at night, but I figured I would at least get it started and move some things over in the morning. I tossed everything onto the ground and started sorting out colors when I got hit with a horrible feeling in my gut. The basement was not at all a creepy basement. It was well lit and pretty welcoming with the kitchen and everything, but for reasons that I can't explain, something just started to feel wrong. Anyone who has ever been hit with the feeling that they were being watched knows exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know how or why it came over me, but it was something I couldn't shake. And I found myself looking over to the saloon doors, the only part of the basement that I couldn't see in its entirety. I don't know why, maybe to just assure myself I was being a big baby. Started to walk towards the back room, but stopped myself as I reached out towards the swinging doors. I've been a horror fan for as long as I can remember, and I've seen more horror movies than I could count, and I knew that if it were a movie, I would be calling myself a dumbass and saying to not go in that back room. I quickly snapped my hand back and ran up the stairs, leaving all the clothes behind and into our apartment, where I locked the doors and immediately told my mom that I just had the worst feeling ever in the basement and that I was super creeped out. Despite me not being the type of person that scares easily, she basically rolled her eyes at me and told me to go to bed. I ended up doing as I was told, though it took me a bit to shake the feeling and finally fall asleep. Later that night, my bladder woke me up and I stumbled out of my room to go to the bathroom. I didn't turn any of the lights on as I started making my way towards the bathroom because it usually woke up my grandpa and I didn't want to bother him. When I got closer to the bathroom, I noticed my mom standing in the doorway of her bedroom and something looked off. And it took me a moment to realize that she was clutching the phone. She then noticed me and whispered to me to get against the wall, which I did without hesitation. It took a few moments for the grogginess to wear off and my eyes to adjust to the darkness before I could see what she did. My mom's bedroom was immediately off of the kitchen. The kitchen was where the back door that led to the landing in the basement was located. The door had a tiny window up top with a small but thick curtain. It was thin enough that you could see that anyone was outside of the door, but thick enough to not be able to make out any of the features of the person on the other side. But there was someone on the other side of the door, and every now and then the doorknob would move, and you could hear this scratching sound on the other side. I had never been so scared in my entire life. I'm not sure how I managed to do what I did next. It was like someone else had taken control over me entirely. I slid down against the wall that I was clinging to and started to crawl against it in the darkness towards the kitchen. My mom looked petrified, watching back and forth between me and the back door. She kept whispering for me to stop and go back, but I kept moving forward, low and against the wall, towards the counter where I carefully grabbed a butcher knife. I was shaking the whole time I moved with the knife in my hands, and on the ground next to the fridge, which was next to the door the man was trying to get into. I had this horrible feeling that I was going to be murdered, but if I wasn't going to go down without a fight. It felt like I sat there forever in the darkness next to the door with my mom hiding in the bedroom doorway across from me, just waiting. But it was only for a few minutes. My mom had already called the police before I had woken up and stumbled my way towards the bathroom. The lights from approaching squad cars soon filled the kitchen, and from the other side of the door, I could hear a sudden clamoring and commotion, and the slam of the back screen bursting open as the would-be assailant took off running. It was around 3 a.m. when this happened, so it was completely dark outside, and we lived right by some train tracks and very thick bushes and trees that made it easy for the man to escape the cop that pursued him. The police came in and took statements from me and my mom. My grandpa, who was partially deaf, had managed to sleep through almost the entire thing until the police came through to search the apartment and make sure that we were all right. The outside of the door and doorknob were both covered in deep scratches, like someone had been going at it with a knife, trying to figure out how to get in, but that wasn't the most horrifying part to me. That was reserved for the basement. The clothes that I had brought down there were not where I had left them, and they had been thrown about and disheveled in the back room, the one with the swinging door that I had stopped myself from going in. The boxes that were out of view had also been thrown about, all opened and obviously gone through with some things missing, and there were some wrappers from food on the floor. He had been down there looking for something to steal. He was down there when I went to do laundry. I had almost walked into that room, and based on what we had seen on the door, he had a knife. To this day, I can't help but find myself sometimes thinking about what would have happened if I walked into that room. My brother and I worked across the street from a mini storage place, and roughly 2 years ago, we had noticed they had an auction sign out front. We decided to check it out, so we walked over hoping to find something interesting. If you haven't watched Storage Wars, the way these work is the auctioneer opens a unit and you're not allowed to enter or touch anything, and you only have a window of about 15 seconds to look around and decide if you want to bid. This unit was small, 4x4, and my brother and I noticed a group of 5 fishing poles amongst other boxes and bags. We have been talking about buying a few poles, and this seemed like a good chance, so we yelled out a low bid and won. Per the auction rules, we had until the end of the day to empty out the unit. Being small, this was a 2 garbage can job, so we got a can and started sorting. It started promising with finding a nice microscope and a few tools, etc. Standard storage stuff. I pulled out a plastic garbage bag and opened it to find another tied shut garbage bag, which I opened to find another tied shut garbage bag. And since nothing terrifying is ever kept in triple tied bags, I opened it to find the dried mummified remains of a very old and very dried cat. My brother and I just stopped and stared at each other, and since neither of us needed a dried out cat at that moment, we weren't sure how to handle this specific piece of storage unit treasure. We did what we always do when faced with something this out of context. We laughed uncomfortably, until we looked back into the unit and noticed 2 more tied garbage bags. At the end of the day, we found 3 bags with parts of or entire cats. We also aren't doctors, but we are pretty sure that there are at least some dog parts in there as well. Granted, saying it was a storage unit full of dead cats would have been a bit of an exaggeration, but considering that a storage unit generally has no dead cats, I think a small unit with 3 or 4 could be considered full. As if multiple bags of dead cats weren't bad enough, The creepiest part of the whole thing was finding his or her creepy drawings of cats and a used pink cat food and water bowl. I spoke with the manager of the storage facility and explained my findings, and I asked who owned that unit. Obviously they couldn't give the name, but when I asked if they were perhaps a vet, the owner laughed and said, "Yeah, definitely not." He also said that explains why the person's other abandoned unit that had gone up for auction prior had been fully stored with empty plastic cat carriers. When I was 15, I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma with my sister and mom to live with an uncle I never met before. As horrible as he is not the main focus in this story. My uncle would pick up random men around the city and pay them to work for him. He owned his own tree trimming business, and he treated them all horribly. This one guy he hired, I won't state his name here, eventually moved in and started regularly working for my uncle. Let's call him S. He was a major alcoholic, but he seemed like an all-around nice, helpful guy. He would always offer to help with things I or my mom were working on. I remember one time, he had bought cookie dough only for me to end up eating it, and when he asked what happened to it and I admitted it, he responded, "I don't blame you. It's delicious. That's what it's meant for." Soon after moving in, he came in drunk to have a conversation with my mom in our living room. She obliged. Again, he came across as very open-hearted and a kind person, so it was a pleasure speaking with him. A while into the conversation, he slips in something unnerving. He tells her if there's anyone around who's harmed her or is making her life hell, he would take care of them. My sister recently rekindled an old flame, and he ended up moving out here to stay with us. Immediately upon his arrival, issues occurred between my uncle and him. Nothing too big, mainly arguments. Let's call her boyfriend M. Right before M moved out there to live with us, he was depending on a huge settlement for a work accident. Well, he got it, and he kept it all in cash. Over the past couple of weeks upon his arrival, my sister and he quickly faded out of love. My uncle proposed a job offer to S about an apartment downtown. My uncle was also a carpenter. The job proposal was that S move into his apartment to live while he worked on it so my uncle didn't have to. Again, he picks up guys to work with him so he can give them shit pay because he's an all-around asshat. S happily accepts the offer. I'm sure, because not only is he getting paid, but he gets to live apart from his abusive joke of a boss. After my sister and M lose interest in each other, he inquires about moving with S into this new apartment to live and help work. They end up both moving there. M's settlement money came within the month after his move into the apartment with S. We ended up moving into our own house a few minutes away, and my sister lost contact with them. One night, my sister, mom, and I are all sitting in the living room, and my mom's phone rings, breaking the late-night silence. It's my uncle. Only a few seconds into the phone call before her face contorts into that of disbelief and horror. I come and sit on the rug in front of her, inquisitive. I can tell by looking at her. I can tell by the cold shift in the atmosphere that something was horribly wrong. She's looking around the house fretfully and responds to our caller. "Okay, just calm down. Tell me exactly what happened." What happened? Well, my uncle went over to M and S's apartment. It's around 11 p.m., I believe. When he arrives, he notices the door is slightly ajar. That's obviously a little unnerving. He pushes the door open and the apartment is pitch black. He brings out his flashlight. There is someone on the couch, but they aren't in any relatively normal position. They're slumped over the arm, the head on the seat. My uncle walks closer, calling out for M or S. The closer he walks, the more details magnify. Surreally, there is blood and brain matter all over the man in the couch. He's been brutally bludgeoned to death. My uncle runs out of the apartment in pure terror. He calls the police and he calls my mom. My sister is crying as my uncle is identifying. Yes, I think it was M. It aired on the news soon after, but they didn't give an identity yet. By the description of the physical characteristics, it was clearly her recent ex-boyfriend M. So where was S? Where was all of M's settlement money? Nobody saw or heard him again until 3 years later when he was captured and sentenced to prison. And that's the story of the time I lived with a murderer. So this happened when I was 16, visiting my grandma who lives in a small town in Poland. Just for some context, it was summer and my family wasn't with me at the time. As you can imagine, living without my parents for a short time, my grandma is really chill, was a dream. I could stay out as late as I wanted to without my parents being able to prove it. Now at 16 you feel invincible. You don't really think about how many screwed up people are there in this world. Because of this mindset, I wasn't worried about being alone at night. The day on which the story takes place was very hot. I remember shopping and hanging out with some of my friends until about 8 p.m. when it started to rain. Instead of walking home quickly, I decided to visit my aunt's house, hang out with my cousin for a bit, and walk home when the rain stopped. Well, I lost track of time and ended up leaving her house at about 10:30 p.m. At this point, the rain had mostly stopped, and this being my favorite type of weather, I declined my aunt's offer to drive me back, telling her I was getting a cab. I'm still surprised she believed this, but maybe she just didn't care. So I went on my way and called my grandma to tell her that I'd be home in like 30 minutes, but I didn't tell her I was walking alone. If there was one thing that scared me, it was the huge train tracks, which you had to cross in order to get to my grandma's house the fastest. So I decided to take the longer way around through some sort of nature preserve, whatever you call it. I enjoyed my walk through the light rain until the long metal bridge came into my view. Just at its beginning, I saw a man. It was a small, quiet town, so it wasn't uncommon for the people here to be out this late, but I wasn't scared immediately. I only saw his back, but he looked like every other guy you'd pass by on the street. He didn't seem to notice me, and I didn't really care. I got distracted by looking at the trees to my left, but when I came to the beginning of the bridge, the man was nowhere to be seen. I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks and got an ominous feeling. This man couldn't have already been out of my view. It would have been impossible for him to move this fast. He would have had to run, and I definitely would have heard him running on the metal bridge. At the end of the bridge, there was a small path that led under it, which was hidden by thick bushes. I got even more scared by the thought that he was hiding there waiting for me. I slowly started to walk backwards, not taking my eyes off the bushes. I hid behind a tree and decided to wait for a few minutes to see if he was hiding there. After maybe 10 minutes, my biggest fear came true. Suddenly the man emerged from the bushes, looking in my direction. He was holding something big and shiny. I could make out in the dark that it was a knife. My mind started racing with 1,000 questions. How did he see me, and why didn't I see the knife before? Where was he hiding it? He suddenly started to run in my direction, like super fast. He ran straight past me, hiding behind this tree, and I was so relieved. When he was out of sight, I ran faster than I ever ran before, not stopping to look behind me, being frightened the whole way back, thinking that he'd somehow find me and do whatever sick thing he had in mind. Luckily, I arrived home safely, and my grandma was waiting for me mad. I decided to not tell her what happened. Partially not to worry her, but also so she wouldn't tell my parents about our secret curfew. Looking back, this was one of the stupidest lies I've ever told because of what happened a month after this incident. 2 teenage girls about my age were stabbed a dozen times by this bridge. One body was found about 30 meters from it. The other one was thrown into the river nearby. To this day, nobody knows who did it, but I'm pretty sure that it was the same man whom I've encountered. I was too scared to come out and tell anyone what happened, but I can't help but feel that those 2 girls would be alive today if it wasn't for my stupidity. This happened while I was in college, 5 years ago. I was a transfer student and I was 21 at the time. I was set up to be living in a building that was for students 21 or older and moved in a week and a half before classes began. The school was in northern Michigan, so when I first arrived, campus was dead. I mostly kept to myself, but was friendly with a few people in my building. Namely, one guy named Khalil, an exchange student from Lebanon. He seemed nice enough, though there was a distinct language barrier, so things were easily lost in translation. Our RD and RA, resident director and resident assistant, made everyone who had moved in have a meeting to go over basic rules and whatnot. At the end of the meeting, as I am leaving the rec room, Khalil suddenly puts his arm up the wall in front of me, almost clotheslining me. Caught off guard, I am peeved and creeped out by this aggressive move. He begins explaining that he would like to be my friend and would like to go out to dinner to get to know me. He worded it oddly, so I wasn't sure if it was a date or just a friendly invitation, but I attributed it to his bad English. Like the imbecile I am, I felt cornered physically and socially. I am awful with confrontation and can be way too nice, so I agreed. He meant right then and there, however, and said, "Okay, I'll get us a taxi and we go now." My introverted side was upset that my night of drinking and unpacking in solitude was disrupted, so I was not excited. If only I knew listening to that inner introvert would have saved me from an unsettling experience. 10 minutes later, we are getting into this taxi, and as I'm entering, I feel this sense of dread. I think, I barely know this dude, and Hudson's, the restaurant, is a couple of miles away, and I will be stranded out there with this stranger if it gets weird. As we drive, my guard raises higher and higher. He wants to know everything about me and is throwing questions rapid fire. My age, dating history, Physical preferences in men, religion, family, everything. I'm thinking, man, this is going to be so awkward, and I might want the night to be over before we even get to the restaurant. At the restaurant, we both look at the menu for a bit. The waiter comes and takes my order. Salad and a small and quick thing to eat. And then the waiter asks what Khalil wants. He says, "Oh no, I'm not hungry. I just want to watch her eat." What the heck? Why would you ask me for dinner if you weren't hungry, and why the heck do you just want to watch me eat? I was horrified. All my family was in the lower peninsula of Michigan, like 8 hours away. I had no friends up here. The only local numbers I had were of my RA and RD. I speed eat my salad as Khalil watches me, now talking all about himself. He tells me about how he has anger problems and is looking for a woman to help calm him but still be submissive and a traditional wife. I'm trying to hide the horror and uneasiness as I nod and eat. He continues explaining how he was known for his temper back home and how his brothers have stopped him from doing awful things. At this point, red flags are blinding my vision. It's time to end this now. I finish my food and tell him to get a taxi back to campus. I intentionally sat in front of the taxi. I wasn't allowing the possibility of physical contact. When we get to campus, we get in the building and I say a quick thank you and haul my ass back to my room. Door locked, I get in my sweats and try to talk it up to a weird experience and vow to avoid Khalil from then on. Around 12:30 a.m., I hear a knock on my door. I was watching Netflix and took out my earbuds to make sure I was hearing right. The knocking continues. Not a courteous knock, but a closed fist pounding. I'm petrified and making as little noise as possible to get to the door and look out the people. I see Khalil. Our room was at the very end of a long hallway. All rooms around me at this point were empty, with the door outside of my room leading to a parking lot surrounded by woods. Knowing how isolated I was, I slinked away from the door, making zero noise, just waiting for the knocking to stop. About a minute later, it stops. He growls, "I know you were in there, so I will wait." My eyes widened in horror. I felt a mixture of rage and panic, but decided that confronting him then wouldn't be smart, so I quietly watched Netflix until I fall asleep. I have no idea how long he waited out there. The next morning, when I finally emerge from my room, I find a couple of pages taped to my door. 3 handwritten pages from Khalil, explaining his feelings for me and his intentions of making me his wife. I went straight to my RA and explained everything. She agreed to meet with Khalil herself, to explain to him how inappropriate he was being, and to tell him to leave me alone. But he didn't. Notes kept coming. He came to my door dozens of times a day, and I became pretty much trapped in my room hiding from this psycho. It lasted for like 8 days, but classes began and Khalil disappeared. I was told he dropped out and moved back to Lebanon. I found it eerie how he just vanished. Had he come here solely to find a wife? I'll never know, but Khalil, please never talk to me again. I was 26 and I'm a lady. I needed gas and it was around 11 p.m. on a Saturday. I pulled into a busy gas station to fill my tank, except it was completely bare. Not a car in sight. I also live in Alaska and it was very cold this night, maybe negative 10 degrees. Tired after work, just wanting to get home, I usually start my pump, then sit in my car due to the freezing cold, but this time I had a weird feeling that I needed to stand by the pump, so I did. I just started pumping my gas when a little golden sedan pulled up right next to me. A guy got out and I was feeling hypervigilant for some reason. He started cleaning his completely clean windows. As he put back the squeegee, he started towards me. I felt like I wanted to run but stayed calm and continued pumping. He asked me if I would help him put his windshield wiper fluid in his car because he ran out and doesn't know how to open the hood. I laughed it off and told him I don't know either, which was a lie. He kept getting closer and closer to me while trying to lure me into his car by saying there's something under his seat and he can't reach because he is too big. Now I'm 5'2" and petite. This man was large and scruffy. Think Alaska wilderness, dude. At this point, I'm freaking out and hit the call button on the pump. He took a step back and started to go back to his car. I thought I was being smart. My gas is almost done. I looked in his car when I noticed the insides of the doors had no handles except for the driver door. That freaked me out immediately. I was putting the pump back and opening my door. He was right behind me. He slammed my door shut and yelled, "You're coming with me." Obviously, I refused and I was petrified. He grabbed my arm and slammed me against my car. I elbowed him as hard as I could. I started to scream at the top of my lungs. I'm extremely thankful for the gas attendant with a big-ass gun that night because if not for him, I don't know what would have happened. The attendant pulled the video and we made a police report. I called immediately after that guy took off. I never heard anything else about it. I just hope he didn't get some other girl alone. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. When I was in the 5th grade, I started going to a middle school named Dorothy Fisher Magnet Middle School. It was there that I met Patrick Selepak. We became really good friends very quickly. He was very smart, funny, charming, good-looking, and kind-hearted. Or so I thought that. We were best friends until I moved out of the city of Detroit and attended a different middle or high school. We lost touch when we were about 15 or 16 years old. I always wondered what happened to him, and I thought of him often over the years. In February of 2006, I heard about the murder of Melissa Barrels and her husband Scott. They lived a few miles down the road from me. Melissa was like 10 weeks pregnant, and Patrick befriended Melissa after shopping at the grocery store where she worked. He wanted more out of the relationship than just friends. He followed her home one day and convinced Melissa to let him and his girlfriend Samantha come in and hang out for a while. Patrick had guns with him. He hit Melissa in the head with the gun and knocked her to the ground. He proceeded to strangle her with a belt. He convinced his girlfriend to help him because it was taking too long for her to die. During this, Melissa's husband came home. He was hit in the head with a gun and then locked in the bathroom while Pat and his girlfriend finished killing Melissa. Once she was dead, they turned their attention to Scott. Samantha went to CVS and got duct tape, syringes, and a few other things. They tried injecting bleach into Scott's veins to kill him. That did not work. Scott was tortured for about 4 hours before he finally succumbed to his injuries. Pat and Samantha moved the bodies to a back room. They wrapped them in painter's plastic and duct taped it, covered the bodies with a tarp, and then they left. Melissa's parents called the police to do a welfare check when she did not show up for work. Police found the bodies under the tarp in a room where the Barrels were decorating for the baby they were going to have. Patrick and Samantha fled the Barrels' house in their car. They also had stolen the couple's personal documents so they could assume their identities. Somehow Pat and Samantha ended up in Flint, Michigan. They met a man at a gay club and he offered them a place to stay. They stayed with him for 3 days before the man saw the news and tried to convince Pat to turn himself in. The man walked outside saying he was going to get the police himself. Patrick flipped out and shot the man in the back. Pat then walked up to the man and shot him in the head. Pat and Samantha wrapped this man up the same way he did the Barrels, and they put his body in the back of the man's pickup truck and covered it with a tarp. The next day, a friend of Samantha's called and asked Sam if he would give her a ride to a job interview. Samantha said they would. Before Pat and Samantha got to the girl's house, she saw on TV that they were wanted for murder. She still let them pick her up for the interview. They drove the girl to the hotel where her interview was. She asked them to wait there for her because she wouldn't be long. As soon as she got inside the hotel, she called the police. When police arrived, they arrested Patrick and Samantha and found the body in the bed of the truck. Patrick and Samantha are both serving life sentences with no possibility of parole. They were both featured on the ID Channel show Wicked Attraction. The title of the episode is Single White Male, which aired in 2009. If anyone would like to verify the story, there are millions of links on Google. So this is a story for which I was very young. It was a few years after I was born, so I don't remember a whole lot, only bits and pieces. I'd say I was around 5 or 6 years old. My parents filled in the gaps for me, so I'm going to tell the whole version of the story, both my parents and theirs. We were living in an old farmhouse at the time. My parents were very poor, so they rented from a landlord that owned a few small properties in the area. My dad worked in the steel mill on the midnight shift, so he worked some odd hours. This is relevant because it might be the only reason that we are still alive and that I'm able to write this story today. Next thing you know, we hear a crash, and a lady screaming, "Help, help! He's going to kill me! Help me!" We jolted out of bed and we were fully awake in an instant. I was sleeping in bed with my parents at the time because I had been having awful night terrors. My dad, who had just been switched from the midnight shift to days, jumped out of bed and cautiously made his way down the stairs, grabbing a stoking pick from the fireplace in the living room. He got to the door when he heard it again. "Help! He's coming!" The woman's voice on the other side of the door began sobbing hysterically. "We have to help her. Open the door," said my mom. My mom is inherently a good woman who always goes out of her way to help people every single day of her life. She reached for the deadbolt, but my dad stopped her. He shot her a look and said cautiously through the door, "What's going on? Who's after you and where is he?" The voice through the door responded, "I just need to get in before he gets here. Please." My father turned on the porch light and said, Stay up on the porch with your back against the door. He then opened the deadbolt, but not the chain lock. He slipped a brick that we used as a doorstop through the crack. Take this, and use it to defend yourself if you need it. I'll be right on the other side of this door, and if he comes after you, I'll come out and help. In the meantime, I'm calling the police. They'll be here soon. This is when the woman started to absolutely lose her mind. She began slamming her whole body into the door with a mindless fury. What the heck is wrong with you people? Let me in this damn house right now. What kind of people are you? My dad forced the door shut and clicked the deadbolt home again. He immediately called the police and they came within like 10 minutes. When they arrived, the woman was simply gone. The doorstep brick was sitting on one of the porch steps. My parents gave a description of the events and the woman as best they could. Tried our best to get sleep in the following nights, but Mom and Dad checked all of the locks and windows several times throughout the night. I don't remember understanding what happened, but I remember thinking that my parents were acting strange and wondering why they didn't help this woman. Thought that the man snuck up and got her while they were calling the police. A few days later, we found out that the police had been called for a similar situation. My dad's brother-in-law worked in law enforcement and told us that this time, the police had happened to have a car down the street and arrived without lights and sirens. The officers saw the woman that my parents had described at the front door on top of the porch. When they began walking, a man dashed out of the bushes from the side of the porch. They chased him down pretty quickly and recovered a long kitchen knife from the bushes where he had been hiding. The man and the woman had been working together to try to gain entry to houses. The police surmised that the woman would get people to open the door and let her in, and then let her partner in. But who knows what he would have done once he got inside. Once I heard this story and put it together with my memories of the event, it sent chills down my spine, literally. Imagine what would have happened if my dad had been working the midnight shift or if he had been asleep. He grew up in a very bad neighborhood, Gary, Indiana, so he was always overly cautious about people around him. Usually it was mildly irritating, but this time it may have saved our lives. This was the first and only time I ever used my emergency code word with my mom. My dad was in a band, and some of his band members were in a country band that had a performance on the 4th of July. It was taking place in a ranch-type area near a highway. When I got there, I quickly realized that everyone there was either 20 years older than me or 10 years younger. I was 17 at the time, and so I realized that I was most likely going to be there bored for 3 hours. One of the band members' wives brought over a girl who looked to be my age. She introduced her to me and treated her like a friend. The girl, who we'll call Sarah, started talking with me and asked if I would like to go for a walk around the field. I agreed, and we set off. We started talking about school, and it turns out she was a year younger than me, and she was homeschooled. I told her that I went to an all-girls Catholic school, and she started talking about how she thought most girls were pretty bitchy, and though she was Catholic, she practiced witchcraft. I thought it was kind of weird, but I tried to be open-minded, so I wasn't judging her. We finally got to the side of the field that couldn't be seen by people at the event, but was right next to the highway. There we came across the body of a dead deer. She looked at me and said, "I really wish I could take his hoof. I wonder if I have any bags on me." I thought she was joking, but she reached into her backpack and pulled out a knife in a brown paper bag. She went over to the dead deer and started sawing at its foot, but she couldn't get it all the way through. She tried to get me to help her, but I said no, so she put down the knife and ripped the hoof off with her bare hands. At this point I was freaking out because she had just been talking about how she liked violence and didn't really care about people being hurt. She grabbed the hoof, put it in the bag, and then put it in her backpack. She was still carrying the knife. I tried texting my mom, but there was no service where we were standing. We kept walking, and she was talking about how she would put curses on people she didn't like and how she was completely desensitized to death and the killing of animals because she had grown up on a farm where she watched her mother cut the heads off of rabbits. We kept walking and came across a fork in the road, and she said that we should go one way. Then she told me that she wasn't going to chop me into pieces or anything because that doesn't happen much these days. We finally got to a place where there was self-service, and I texted my mom our code word. She told me to get back to the barbecue and we would leave right away. Sarah asked me when I had to leave, and I told her that whenever my grandma got to her house, we would have to go home and meet her. I mentioned something about her bringing her dog named Buddy, and Sarah got excited about the name. She said that she had a dog named Buddy whom she set free in the wild, and he was eaten alive by coyotes, but it was okay because he died happy. We finally got back to where everyone else was, and my mom said that we needed to go home. Sarah then asked for my phone number as she's seen my phone. I agreed and put in a fake number before my parents and I walked away. As soon as we were out of eyesight, I ran to the car. My parents got in the car and asked me if she had pulled out drugs or something. I wish. I would have known how to handle that.